Welcome to FranklinCovey on Leadership. I'm your host, Will Hodeling, FranklinCovey's head of product. In these conversations, you'll hear from the world's greatest leaders about the mistakes, methods, and mindsets that help them become the people they are today. We hope that learning from their hard-earned insights will accelerate your own leadership journey. Today's guest is Stephen M. R. Covey. Stephen M. R. Covey is the son of Stephen R. Covey, the author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He is the former CEO of the Covey Leadership Center, which ultimately merged into FranklinCovey. And he is the New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling author of multiple books, including The Speed of Trust and more recently, Trust and Inspire. In today's wide-ranging conversation, you'll learn how Stephen M. R. Covey learned from his experience leading the Covey Leadership Center and how that ultimately inspired him to write The Speed of Trust. You'll learn about the 4 cores of credibility and the 13 behaviors that make high-trust leaders. And you'll learn about how Trust and Inspire is helping to create a new generation of highly impactful leaders. Stephen M. R. Covey, welcome to FranklinCovey on Leadership.
Hey, thanks so much, Will. Great to be with you.
Absolutely. Really excited to have you here today. So many people who have followed and listened to On Leadership over the years know you well. You're obviously an amazing thought leader and innovator and creator yourself with leading at the speed of trust and now Trust and Inspire. I'd like to start by learning a little bit more about you. You come from a well-known family. Your name is on the side of the company building, but I'd love to hear about your childhood growing up. What was it like growing up with a dad who was one of the world's most famous thought leaders and a lot of lectures around the dinner table, or what was that childhood like?
Yeah, you named it. The thing about it, Will, is at the time we were growing up, he wasn't so well known. He was just kind of in the process of developing the ideas. But we were, I think us kids, we were the first guinea pigs for his ideas. So he would test them with us. And it's interesting because the 7 habits, as kids, we learned the 7 habits individually, habit by habit, before my dad put them all together. And so they were kind of standalone principles around how you need to be proactive. And then we'd have another standalone principle about how we need to, create synergize. And then we'd have another one around putting first things first. And, but that was over years. And then finally, they kind of came together as 7 habits. But we've been taught the principles individually. But it was great. It was the only life I knew, of course.
Of course.
But I look back on it and I realized, what a blessing it was to have such a great dad. But also, I'll say this about my mom. She was my dad's equal, and just not as well known, but an extraordinary force for good. And so I feel fortunate and blessed, and because of that, I feel a sense of responsibility and stewardship to try to do something good with it because of his fortunate circumstances. But I'll also say this: we were like any other family, rambunctious. There's a lot of us. My brother Sean, and we get in fights. All kinds of things. So we were like any other family, but we were trying to do our best. We just happened to have great parents that taught us a lot along the way.
I actually don't think I've shared this with you before, but my mom is an author, not quite as well known as Stephen R. Covey was, but she writes family books, and she actually interviewed your dad. This is now probably 40 years ago, about how you can apply the lessons of the 7 habits to raising great families. And so I was influenced by those powerful lessons from her learning and writing as well. So thank you for helping to incubate those habits along the way.
That's fantastic to hear. I'll bet that was part of what prodded my dad later to write the 7 habits of highly effective families. That came like a decade plus later. And it might have been prodded by some of that interview.
Yeah, maybe. When you were growing up, did you think that you would follow in his footsteps and become, such a successful writer and thinker on leadership as well? Or were there other careers that you were considering growing up?
Yeah, I actually was considering some other things, and I had a real bent for business, and So I did real estate development for a short period, and that was exciting and fun. I did investment banking on Wall Street for a short period, and that was exciting and fun as well. But ultimately, I remember debating: do I go into this real estate opportunity or join with my dad and try to focus on leadership development? And I remember my dad asking a question. He said, "Well, it's your choice, but what do you feel most called to do? Do you feel most called to develop buildings or develop people? Build buildings or build people?" And look, nothing wrong with building buildings. That's a good thing. It's just that wasn't my why. I felt more drawn to say, I want to focus on building people. But my initial thought on that, Will, was it was a little intimidating to try to think of following in my dad's footsteps. Because when I joined, it was right when he was releasing 7 Habits, and it just took off. And so I kind of carved out my own identity by saying, well, I'll go down the business path. I won't focus on speaking or writing. I'll try to run this company as a business. And I did that for the first half of my career, the first 15 years, and went down that business path. And it was only kind of after we did this merger where we struggled and really had, Franklin Quest and Covey Leadership Center merged to form FranklinCovey, and we were struggling from a lack of trust. And then when we focused on building the trust, we came out of that. I suddenly felt like, hey, I just found my voice around trust. And suddenly the fear of following in my dad's footsteps and just being a poor man's version of Stephen R. Covey, it suddenly dissipated. I no longer worried about it. I felt like I have something to say. And then I kind of shifted careers from the management side to the thought leadership side. And that's when I wrote The Speed of Trust and Trust Inspire. And since then, I've kind of been focusing on being a thought leader. But I didn't start that way at all. I started as a practitioner, almost by design, to differentiate from my dad.
I want to ask you more about that era as a practitioner. As you were saying, many people now know you as the thought leader, the author of Speed of Trust, Trust and Inspire. You were the CEO of the Covey Leadership Center. You launched Covey Leadership Center in 40 countries. You doubled revenues. You, I think, grew profit 12x, I read, and ultimately led to the merger between Franklin Quest and Covey Leadership Center. As mentioned, what did you learn about yourself during that period? You now work with so many leaders, but you are a leader of a large business as well. What did you learn about yourself during that integration period?
Yeah, so much. But here, let me just highlight one key insight and learning that came to me. I remember early on when I first got in, we had we always had a great mission, because it was around 7 Habits, leadership development, helping people. Our problem, Will, was that we felt like we should serve every cause out there. We could apply it to everything. We could apply our mission, yes, to business, but also to families and even to communities and all kinds of things. And so we started to do all kinds of started to go into a lot of different businesses that we really couldn't compete in. They were more like hobbies where it could serve a good mission, like our work in communities. That's a great work to do. But communities don't buy leadership development. They don't buy training. And so it was a nice thing. It moved the mission forward, but we had no margin in it. We couldn't make any money at it. And we were in a lot of hobbies, and we were kind of trying to do all these different things. And when I came in as a new CEO, we were in violation of all our bank covenants. We'd had 11 straight years of negative cash flow.
Wow.
We were growing. So we had a good message, but we didn't have a business model to match our message, and we weren't disciplined. So we were going to grow ourselves right out of business, run out of cash.
Wow.
And so we had to make a lot of hard decisions. And what I remember the most was being just bombarded by voices from every side of people's opinions of what we needed to do, what business we should get out of, and costs we had to cut, and people we had to cut, and because we had to make some moves to stay alive. We ended up having to sign personal guarantees to keep the company afloat, so that the bank didn't pull the plug on us, and we had to change. But I remember being confused because I had dozens of voices of people I respected just flooding my head, and they were all contradictory. Someone would say, you need to invest in this, and another person would say, get out of that business. Just
How did you sort through them?
Opposite. That was my problem, was I was at first almost paralyzed by it because there was so many voices. And then finally, I just realized that I needed to trust myself. I could be influenced by these voices. I could listen to it. But at the end of the day, I had to make a decision, all things considered. And rather than being, drowned out by the cacophony of noises with diverging opinions, I ultimately had to just kind of calm myself, step back, and say, what do I feel? I looked at the data. It wasn't a gut feel. Looked at the data, but I had to make some calls and some decisions. And it was when I learned to trust myself and my instincts, as well as the data as I interpreted it, then suddenly I became clear on what to do. And I'm not sure I made every right decision, but we made a lot of good decisions such that we finally figured out a good business model, and we were able to then grow and scale our company and be able to succeed with it. But the real learning is something that just stays with me to this day, that ultimately you got to trust yourself and be informed by everything else from the outside. But you can get lost in a sea of opinions. And ultimately, real great leadership is one where you can stop and reflect and feel a sense of clarity and judgment that comes to you based upon all that you've done to prepare you for that moment. And that happened with me. And once I did that, I could tune out the noise. I could be informed by it. I could learn to tune it out and make considered judgments, considered opinions. And we did grow the company and ended up doing the merger. And
I think you made a lot of great decisions as the company still is standing despite
Still
all
around.
those main covenants and personal guarantees. You luckily never had to be called out on any of them because it's still standing around and thriving today. So
That's
thank you
right.
for all those great decisions all those years ago. You mentioned earlier coming out of that merger is what really inspired the work on trust, and that you had never wanted to be a thought leader or to be an author. You were a business leader yourself, but you just had this aha moment coming out of that merger about the importance of trust. Maybe speak more to that. What was the light bulb moment, and how did that lead to the speed of trust?
Yeah, it was, we had these two great companies, Franklin Quest, the time management company, great company, Covey Leadership Center. We had the 7 Habits. So, great content. It made all kinds of sense to put us together. We had good people in both companies. We had good values. And on paper, it was like a perfect merger, but we had been arch competitors with each other, competing in the marketplace, and we kind of saw the world through different lenses. So even though the values were similar, the approaches were quite different and contradictory. And so now these two competitors are put in the room saying, work together. And we'd been just at each other's throats for a decade. And there just wasn't trust to begin with. It wasn't so much that we'd caused distrust once we were merged, but more we came into it as competitors. They didn't fully trust each other. And I remember the first really year in the merger, we were being bogged down by low trust, by a lack of collaboration, a lack of innovation. And it was mostly because people kind of felt like they were right. And we almost had tribes of the Covey side, the Franklin side. And so what was happening is, on paper, the merger made all kinds of strategic sense. But in reality, we were being diminished and diluted. I call it taxed by low trust. And we finally became aware of it, that our problem is to optimize this merger, we've got to learn to trust each other. So we became intentional and said, look, we have to work with each other on building trust between these two organizations to achieve, the purpose of the merger. Otherwise, we will never achieve it. And it's not a bad idea. It's just that we've got to trust each other to get get the synergies that we want and the gains and the benefits. So by working on it intentionally and becoming very deliberate about it, we actually began to build that trust. And when we began to build the trust, it tended to perpetuate itself. And, trust can create more trust, and people respond back to it. And we began to extend trust. People would receive it and return it. And we began to behave in ways that built trust. Long story made short is we actually moved the needle on trust and really changed the whole dynamic and culture to where we actually became a high trust team and culture combined as one company, not two entities working, separately, even though they're forced to work together. No, now we were one company, changed everything. And then all the economics and all the positive benefits that flowed from that were also quite impactful. And I kind of came away from that whole experience saying, my goodness, this merger really hung in the balance on trust. It wasn't strategy. The strategy was good, but we were being diminished and diluted by a lack of trust. And once we built that trust, it changed everything. Trust really is the one thing that changes everything. And yet, most of the stuff on trust is either too academic or too simplistic. And this is so practical, so tangible, but it's also learnable. We just learned how to create it on purpose, how to build trust intentionally. And I suddenly felt like this is a big idea that people need, because we're underestimating trust and its impact by a factor of 10. Or maybe by a factor of 100. And we don't focus enough on how trust is learnable. It's not just kind of a natural outcome. It's something you can intentionally and deliberately create if you understand how to build it. And suddenly I felt like I just found out what I wanted to talk about. Why trust matters and how we create this trust. And from that was born the speed of trust. And really, this merger, I'm giving a nice version of it. It was a crucible for me, Will.
Yeah.
It was a tough thing. I mean, half the people didn't trust me. And that's hard, totally. To be in that situation, because I always felt like I was trustworthy, and yet half the people didn't trust me. And it was painful, and I had to earn that trust. And so it was out of the crucible that some meaning and purpose came out of it I found my voice of what I wanted to focus on.
Disruption demands leaders who empower, not micromanage. Transform your leadership style from outdated to exhilarating with FranklinCovey's guide, Trust and Inspire, the leadership framework built for disruption. Grab your free copy from the show notes to build trust, spark innovation, and elevate team performance amid uncertainty. It's such a great example of the personal experience then driving the professional journey. You experience what the lack of trust was like, and then you realize this is my why of teaching people about the importance of trust and the kind of speed of trust. It's now been 19 years since you published the book, and you've worked with thousands of companies, hundreds of thousands of leaders. One of the things that I admire about the work you do is the focus on grounding in research and really demonstrating proof of the importance of trust. So maybe speak to some of the research you all have done over the years of the impact of trust and really the case for trust in the workplace.
Yeah, I think this is important to kind of make the case for trust because, at one level, everyone knows that trust is important. I mean, who's going to argue and say, no, trust doesn't matter? Everyone knows it's important. But still, to make strong connections to why this is so important and where it matters and how and to what measure is important. And so there's all kinds of research and data, some of our own, but a lot from other third party and other sources everywhere around this, including even the whole premise of the speed of trust, that there's a speed to trust, that once you build trust in relationships, teams, and cultures, you move fast. Now, common sense tells you that, but there's data and research behind it that shows as leaders and managers increase more trust, as they become more trusted, they move much faster. And at every 10% interval, as trust goes up in the leader, the speed goes up with it dramatically. There's a speed to trust. But also, there's lower cost when the trust goes up because you don't have to take all those steps to compensate for the lack of trust. Redundancy and excessive rules, regulations, policies, procedures, bureaucracy, all kinds of things that get in place in low trust environments. So you can measure around speed, greater speed when there's trust, lower cost. Whereas the opposite is true. When there's low trust, everything takes you longer, everything costs you more. And you can quantify that. And we've done it, and others have done it. But also, we can look at the other elements of trust around the ability to collaborate goes up dramatically with trust. The ability to innovate goes up with trust. A recent study from LRN shows that high trust organizations innovate 11 times more than do low trust organizations, because when there's high trust, people are not afraid to take a risk, even make a mistake, because they know that the company has their back. And that's how they innovate, by being willing to fail. You know, the science of failing well, like Amy Edmondson talks about it. And you get better at this, but you need trust to do it. A recent study shows that people are 14 times more likely to be fully engaged when they can trust their immediate supervisor. So you want to move the needle on engagement?
Yeah, powerful.
Increase the level of trust with your supervisor. You lead change better. You build teams better. There's data, there's research behind all of this, but I'll share some recent stuff. Is the neuroscience on trust. Paul Zak of showing what high trust cultures, how they're 106% more energized than low trust cultures. We all intuitively know it, but the data bears it out. They're 76% more engaged, with 74% less stress, 40% less burnout. So really, trust not only helps us move faster with lower cost, that's the business case, but there's a leadership case of how it creates greater energy, greater joy, greater well-being, a better culture. So I like to say that trust is good. The business case is this. Trust is good for the business. It's a performance multiplier. It puts an economic value on your business, about a 3x multiplier. But also trust is good for the people, for the culture, because it's good for well-being. It creates energy, it creates joy. And that is, vital for people today. Yeah. And so it's really an idea whose time has come, because it meets both. It's good for the business, good for the people, for the culture. And so we try to make the case. Every time I present, I try to make that case in the language of the client I'm making it for, so that I'm speaking to their needs, their opportunities, and not just generically.
Yeah. You make a persuasive case for trust. Absolutely. And I think the data that you have is quite compelling. I'm not going to ask you to go into the foundational framework in the book. You talk about the 4 cores of credibility and the 13 behaviors. So I would recommend to all of our listeners, read the book, listen to an audio, to bring the solution to your company with FranklinCovey. One personal challenge, I would say, having read the book and gone through the course, is 13. It's a lot of behaviors. So what's your response to people who are overwhelmed by the number of behaviors to try to keep in mind? Start there.
No, I do understand. Well, 2 things. First, before the behaviors, what leads to the behaviors is the 4 cores of credibility. And that's just 4 things.
Yep, and those are easier. Yep,
they're easier. That's right. They're easier. And those 4 more, that kind of frames it into these 4 categories of the dimensions, the elements around which trust are built. And so that's kind of a simpler way of saying, okay, trust means that there's integrity and intent flowing from our character, and then capabilities and results flowing from our competence. And that's a construct in and of itself. So that's the simpler version. While 13 is a lot, there's hundreds of behaviors to choose from. So 13 is culled down from the hundreds of behaviors that, depending upon how thin you slice them. And so, but the strength of the 13 is this. They're so specific. They're so practical. They're so tangible. Talk straight, demonstrate respect, create transparency, very clear, specific things you can do. They're all verbs. You can do them. You can apply them. All 13, listen first, keep commitments, extend trust. And so they are so concrete, so practical and tangible that it really gives people some very practical behavioral things they can do to grow more trust. And so it's its greatest strength. And then in our training, as you know, we use I don't have them with me, but we use trust cards to make it easier and more accessible. And my whole premise is, I know 13's a lot, but I usually will use it as an overarching framework of these are the highest leverage behaviors. And now as you apply, as you look at your current context, your current situations, are there certain behaviors that jump out to you that would be most valuable to apply in this context, in this situation, in this relationship? So you kind of build your own plan.
All 13. Maybe
you don't need all 13.
You really need to focus on a few. That makes perfect sense.
You focus on a few based on the context or the relationship.
Yeah. 3 years ago, you released another book, Trust and Inspire, which, congratulations, is also a New York Times, Wall Street Journal bestseller. What inspired you to write a second book? In some ways, probably what was unfinished about Leading at the Speed of Trust that you felt like you needed to update for the modern era?
Yeah. It kind of grew out of the Speed of Trust. And a lot of the work where I found when I was going back to a client for the second time, third time, fourth time, and they looked at the model of building trust, here's what I found was that the bigger challenge for these organizations as they kind of grew deeper into this and went further was less around the fact that people weren't trustworthy because they've gotten better at that, and more around that we were not extending enough trust. We weren't giving enough. And that's a simple thing, but it's not an easy one because there's always a risk in trusting. And I like to point out, yes, there is, but there's also a risk in not trusting. And not trusting is quite often the greater risk. And so it was from that I said, we've got to become more trusting. And while that is one of the behaviors, it's the 13th behavior, extend trust, this started to grow, this started to expand into a broader kind of leadership approach of what's our style in how we're leading, how we're approaching it. Do we tend to be more the traditional hierarchical kind of, I call it command and control leadership style? Or are we more one of a style that is seeing the potential and the talent and the greatness that's inside of people? And we're viewing our job as not to kind of contain or control people, but rather to release and even unleash them. And I call that a trust and inspire style of leadership. And that kind of emerged out of this idea of we've got to become more trusting. And so I said, so how we lead matters. And the old model that worked well in the industrial age makes us efficient, command and control makes us very efficient, but it's transactional in nature. And it doesn't unleash talent. And here we are all these years later, and still people have a lot more inside of them to give than they're able to give in their jobs, or that we can, get out of them. And that's a leadership problem. We're not leading in a way that's working well enough. So we need a new way to lead, and especially in a new world of work with all the changes and the disruptive technologies, AI, all the things that are hitting us, and as well as the changing workplace, work from home, remote work, hybrid work, the changing workforce with as many as 5 generations with completely different expectations of how they want to be engaged and led. We need a new way to lead, and command and control is not it. It's dead. And I think trust and inspire is a far greater way to lead in a new world of work that taps into the greatness that's inside of people. And so it's a mindset. It definitely it emerged out of the Speed of Trust work as kind of a next level and frontier you can take it to. You still need the Speed of Trust always. That's like blocking and tackling. It's the fundamentals, how you build trust in any relationship, any team, any culture. And then Trust and Inspire says, and here's a style of leadership that you can employ that's a trusting style that also inspires people. And that's where I added one last element to it. It's not just trust, it's adding now inspiration. And, that it's where people want to go. People want to be inspired today. Yes, they want to be trusted, and they also want to be inspired. And leaders who both trust and inspire are able to achieve so much more and bring more out of people.
Yeah. And I think that the model of trust and inspire versus command and control, it's a powerful dichotomy. I think it's a really appealing concept. At the same time, we see these leaders celebrated, lionized for breaking into new industries and defining new categories. People like Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos with Amazon or Steve Jobs, and many of them have this strong command and control presence. So maybe talk about how you see leaders like that are, and they all have very complex reputations and whatnot, but that have broken into new industries and haven't used that. It doesn't seem like they've used the trust and inspire. So how do you kind of square that circle?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And there's no question in particular, entrepreneurs breaking into new territory, and that's very much so much tied to that person. And that, you look at Steve Jobs, he basically impacted 5 industries, I think it is, in some way, shape, or form. And, he was very meticulous and focused on the detail. And at the same time, though, if you read deeper into it, he also really, really understood the importance of hiring really good people and trusting them. But his style was more mercurial, but he also was very much, he could break through, but he had a genius inside of him. And that's harder for all of us to replicate.
Yeah.
It's hard to scale that. It's hard to replicate that. So I'm not saying that there's not a place for a command and control type of approach of when you've got an extraordinary barriers you're breaking through and new, markets to conquest. You need that kind of perseverance and tenacity and vision. And oftentimes it's led by a leader singularly. But to then scale it afterwards, sustain it, continue it on, you'll often see then more different kind of models come in. And I'll use as an example of this, of Satya Nadella at Microsoft.
Yeah.
Bill Gates and then Steve Ballmer, they built it to where it was, and then the world began to shift, and Nadella comes in. So, people played their different roles along the way. But then the last decade, Nadella has kind of played a different role than what was required before, where they needed the initial breakthrough. And his role was to really bring out the best of the talent and the people, and with the strategy that they've employed. And they've really kind of reinvented themselves again and again, recently around AI, but also around the cloud before that. But they've also focused on how they did it to develop their people and their culture. And they focused on modeling the behavior that they wanted to see with a lot of, Nadella's known for leading with humility and empathy. And then trusting. They moved from a management model to a coaching model where they would extend trust to their people, and then inspiring by connecting with people through caring and then connecting to purpose. And so through their leadership style, they unleash the greatness of their people, which has helped them unleash the greatness of their organization. So again, there's different roles at different times.
Yeah.
But if you want to scale something, and if you want to make it sustainable, I believe trust and inspire is far more relevant for our time than command and control to do both those things. Sometimes on the breakthrough, I never will denigrate a command and control breakthrough leader that just takes it on him or herself and makes it happen.
Absolutely. No, I think it's a really important and meaningful nuance that you've added to that dichotomy of command and control, trust and inspire. There might be moments of time where being the command and control leader like a Steve Jobs is actually what the situation needs. But my guess is there are 1,000, 100,000 people who felt like they were Steve Jobs and behaved like Steve Jobs, and we've never heard of them, and they left companies that didn't work in their wake, and bad relationships and whatnot. So that trust and inspire is the more sustainable model for ongoing success. I think that's a great nuance you added.
I'll give you one little anecdote on this. So someone said to me, well, hey, this was not how Steve Jobs led. And I said, great, you guys got a Steve Jobs on your team? If so, you can go ahead and continue. But most of us don't. So, but this other approach will help you really build a team, build a culture, help you collaborate, help you innovate. And you can either go, if you got Steve Jobs, go ahead and go that route. And if you don't, here's another route you can go down. And it's more practical, more realistic for the rest of us. And so again, and I would also say this, that even a trust and inspire leader could be very decisive very strong. Trust and inspire does not mean soft and weak and just this consensus builder that doesn't move fast. No, the context, the situation. If I'm with my grandchildren and I got a young grandchild that runs into the road, I'm not going to sit back and say, well, I trust that he's going to turn around and come back. I'm just going to run after him, grab him, pull him out. But so my actions look like command and control, but I care about my grandchild. I love him. And so my intent, my heart is trust and inspire. So if you're a trust and inspire leader in person, that doesn't mean you can't do command and control type things. I don't see that as a dichotomy at all. I think the broader paradigm is, am I trying to see the greatness in people and unleash it? And then what does the context, the situation need and ask of me?
Yeah, I think that's a powerful way to think about it. Thank you. So I'd love to move to our lightning round.
Okay.
You are a obviously best-selling author. You are an accomplished business professional and leader. You are also the dad of an NFL player, which is not something a lot of people can say. What is it like having a son who's a professional football player? And for those who are listening, Stephen R. Covey's son, Britton Covey, is a wide receiver now on the Rams, formerly punt returner and wide receiver on the Eagles. So what's it like being an NFL dad?
Well, it's fun, it's exciting, and it's also frightening at the same time when you're at the game and, he's only 5'8", 170, and everyone else is a lot bigger out there. And so you watch these games and it's fun. And at the same time, you're praying the whole time that he's safe. That's always the number one, that he's safe and that he gets opportunities. But I'm really proud of Britton because he's worked really hard and he got some good opportunities and he's taken advantage of them. And what he's done more than anything is he's really kind of refined his craft because what's kept him in the league is that he's got a specialized skill in punt returning. And he recognizes that where his lack of size is not such a disadvantage. And he's learned to run with his strengths and then to organize to make his weaknesses less relevant. And his strength is his quickness, and so he focuses on that and his intelligence as opposed to brute strength and going out and trying to block someone. So when he's doing blocking, he's never going to overpower anyone.
Yeah.
So he tries to finesse it and do things with his eyes and with his hands and learn techniques to compensate for the fact that he's not as big and strong as some. So he's a good example of running with your strengths and then organizing to try to make your weaknesses less and less relevant. So I'm really proud of him, and it's a lot of fun to watch.
That's amazing. Well, I wish him well this coming year. Speaking of strengths and weaknesses, 13 behaviors. Which do you think is your strength, and which are you working on?
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm working on all of them all the time. I think a strength of mine is to listen first. It's not always easy, but I think I have the skills to do it if I have the mindset to do it. And so it's one I'm working on still, but I think I'm capable of it. But the reason I have the skills for it, but I have to have the mindset for it. I have to invest the energy because sometimes you want to just move fast, right? And I've learned, though, that with people, fast is slow and slow is fast. Yeah. If I pay the price and listen first and the person feels understood, we can get a lot more done after that very fast. So I go slow up front in order to go fast later. And so that's something I think I'm good at, but I think I need to do more of. So it's a little bit in both camps.
It's both.
And I think I demonstrate respect for others pretty well. And I think I extend trust pretty well. I tend to be trusting. And this is where sometimes I have to make sure that I have smart trust because my tendency, my bias is to want to trust people. And I've learned also we have to make sure they're ready for it. Yeah. And that we haven't set them up to fail. And that we've got the coaching, the mentoring, the help that they need along the way so that they can live up to the trust being given. So that's why I don't want to just blindly trust. I want to extend smart trust. Yeah. So extend trust would be one. And then I think I can get better. I think I can get better at talking straight. And, it's very easy to fall into the counterfeit of a little bit of spin. It's, not mean-spirited, not ill, not being bad person, but just it's natural to posture a little bit. And I can fall into that trap sometimes. And then also, I think with great transparency, I think that there's times where maybe I could be a little bit more transparent by being more vulnerable. And, it's hard to be vulnerable, right? Because none of us, we all kind of want to look good. And sometimes the best way to build trust is actually to be vulnerable that, hey, I'm falling short too.
Yeah.
I'm making a mistake. I'm not good at this. Help me. This is why I need you on the team. And it's sometimes hard to do that. It takes some humility and some courage to do it. And I can get better at that. But I'm a little bit reminded when my dad was asked, do you live the 7 habits? And he replied, about 80% of the time. And I would say the same thing too. Well, if you ask me, do you apply the 13 behaviors? I'd say about 80% of the time. I'm trying 100%, but I'm falling short, but I'm just, course correcting, getting better at it, coming back around. And so about 80% of the time, I think I'm succeeding with it.
Well, 80% is a pretty good number. So
pretty good number.
Pat yourself on the back for that. So final quick question for you. Let's say you had a billboard that everybody in America drove past. What would you write on that billboard?
I would write that trust is the new currency of our time. And, money is a currency. Land is a currency. Oil is a currency. Silicon is a currency. I just was with a chip maker. These are all currencies. But the ultimate currency of what makes our world go around is trust. The ultimate currency of really what makes organizations work is trust, so that we can execute the strategy and collaborate and innovate. What makes relationships work is trust. If we don't trust each other, it's almost the definition of a bad relationship. And what makes our own leadership better is when we have that self-trust. It's even our own currency of self-trust. And so trust is the ultimate currency of our time, the new currency. In a sense, it's always been the currency, but I think we're becoming more mindful and aware of it in a low-trust world.
Yeah.
Where there's distrust all around us. And so if people can learn and know and remember that trust is the new currency of our time, then I think we'll give more intentional focus on it. And we'll get better at it. We'll understand why it matters, but we'll also want to learn how to build it. And sometimes how to rebuild it when it's been lost. And how to turn trust into our greatest strength as leaders, even a superpower, the ability to create trust on purpose.
I love that. Thank you. So our closing question for every guest: who is a leader that has greatly influenced you in your life, and what lessons did you learn from them?
For me, this is simple. It's my father. And maybe you thought I'd go there because I've been so impacted by him in so many different ways. But I'll tell you what I feel like his defining legacy and impact on me has been. And I think it's also what he's done. I mean, writing The 7 Habits alone is an extraordinary book because that's about personal leadership. And so that helps leaders everywhere. But I think that what I would really say, my father was really the ultimate trust and inspire leader because he saw potential in people. And he was able to, see someone, and someone else might see that same person and see nothing. My father would see that person and see talent, greatness, genius. He could see things inside of people that maybe they even couldn't see in themselves. And then he could find a way to communicate that to them so that they would come to see it in themselves. And in fact, that's how he ultimately defined leadership, by saying that leadership is communicating people's worth and potential so clearly that they come to see it in themselves. that they're inspired to see it in themselves. And you know what? He did that with me. As a 7-year-old boy with the green and clean story from 7 Habits, teaching me how to take care of the lawn, the yard, and how he believed in me. He built trust with me. He had confidence I could do it. And ultimately, I rose to the occasion because he treated me according to my potential, not my behavior. And I ultimately lived up to it and became the best version of myself as a 7-year-old, became responsible. And then he, numerous times throughout my life, believed in me and helped me come to believe in myself, helped me see myself differently, such that it shaped me and formed me. And so that's kind of the foundation for what became Trust and Inspire, is seeing the potential, the greatness that's inside of people and finding ways that we not only can see it, but we can communicate it, develop it, and even unleash it. And I learned that and experienced that firsthand from my father, who was not just a great dad, but he really was a Trust and Inspire leader and figure in my life who helped me become the best version of myself that I could be. So that's the best tribute I can give him, that he was my Trust and Inspire leader who unleashed me.
Well, you are a Trust and Inspire leader as well. Thank you so much for sharing today your experiences, your insights, your vulnerability. We greatly appreciate it here at FranklinCovey, having you and your incredible work on leading the speed of trust and now Trust and Inspire. Thank you so, so much. For everybody listening, thank you for joining this week. We've greatly appreciated the conversation with Stephen and Mark Covey. I hope you have learned a lot and you'll take a lot from it. And we hope you join us next week on FranklinCovey on Leadership. Stephen, thank you so much.
Thank you, Will, and thanks to everyone. Really enjoyed being with you. Thank you.